Chapter 1. A Welcome Breeze. Jessica Fletcher always maintained that trains were the finest way to meet strangers, and the 8:14 from Paddington to St Mary Mead did not disappoint. While the morning sun gilded the patchwork fields of Hampshire, the celebrated crime writer, amber hair neatly pinned, notebook tucked beneath her elbow, sat opposite two chatty members of the St Mary Mead Historical Society. Miss Cora Blenkinsop, a brisk widow with a lilac hat the size of a dinner plate, spoke glowingly of the Society's forthcoming fête, while Mr. Edmund Merriweather, all tweed and pipe tobacco, nodded like an obliging metronome. Jessica had accepted their invitation to judge a short story competition, and being fond of English villages and their inevitable tangles, could hardly refuse. At Brackley Holt, the locomotive hissed to a halt, disgorging Jessica and her new acquaintances onto a modest platform trimmed with scarlet geraniums. A painted sign, St Mary Mead, home of heritage and hospitality, squeaked in the breeze. Beyond the wicket gate lay a coil of lanes lined with hawthorn, leading to roofs of russet tile and flint. Jessica paused, tasting the air, sweet hay, chimney smoke, the faint minerality that foretells rain after tea. A taxi drawn from a bygone era sputtered them to the Dovecote, a clapboard guest house guarded by luxuriant roses. Its proprietor, Mrs. Ottilie Dawlish, a dimpled matron in wedge-heeled shoes, ushered Jessica to a room facing the green. "Do ring if you need absolutely anything," she trilled, eyes lingering curiously on the writer's battered typewriter case. "Our village is quiet as a mouse, though you'll find plenty to write about, I dare say." Jessica smiled. She had learned long ago that phrases such as quiet as a mouse were rarely prophetic. By noon, the village hummed with fête preparations. A marquee rose beside the Norman church, bunting fluttered from lampposts, and a brass band rehearsed an optimistic march that repeatedly lost time at the tricky bar in the middle. Jessica wandered amidst the bustle, making a mental sketch of potential suspects, an occupational habit she entertained with wry amusement. She noted Reverend Lawrence Pargeter polishing a tombola drum while murmuring lines of sermon, eyes earnest, knuckles white. Millicent Kane, the pharmacist, arranging jars of barley sugar in perfect Roman ranks, eagle-sharp gaze following every passer-by. Captain Horace Lytton, Retty, limping across the green with a demob cane, muttering about foreign interlopers and brandishing a letter sealed with an unfamiliar crest. Near a trestle table piled with Victoria sponges, Jessica's attention snagged upon an argument half smothered by the throb of the band. Cecil Prothero, the Historical Society's prickly treasurer, whispered fiercely at young Clara Dawlish, Mrs. Dawlish's niece, who wore ink stains on her fingertips and an expression brittle as spun sugar. Cecil's words were lost to the clashing cymbals, yet Jessica caught two. Ledger, an inheritance. Clara stiffened, blinking away moisture, before fleeing toward the lich gate. Cecil noticed Jessica observing and flushed an angry shade of plum, tipping his boater in curt acknowledgement. An hour later, Jessica attended a committee luncheon in the rectory's oak-panelled dining room. Talk flowed of raffle prizes, weather prospects, and the state of the cricket pitch, but under the polite chatter, Jessica detected an undercurrent. Something weightier than sponge cakes troubled these genteel souls. When dessert, an ethereal gooseberry fool, was served, Reverend Pargeter raised a timid question about certain monies gone astray. Silence fell like soot. No one pursued the matter. Spoons tinkled. Conversation turned to the price of marrows. Jessica filed the moment beside the earlier altercation. That afternoon she strolled down Ivy Lane, a shaded track between wych elms, leading to the meadow beyond the village. Her writer's mind ticked over motifs, lost inheritances, missing monies, local resentments, as old as the stocks by the lich gate. A veil of cloud blunted the sun, and a hush settled, broken only by a solitary thrush. Halfway along the lane, Jessica spotted a silver object glinting beneath a briar, a pocket watch, its glass cracked. She knelt, noting a monogram, CP, and within the scratched face, hands frozen at 3:17. Strange, for the luncheon had concluded at 2. By 3, Cecil Prothero had been observed again on the green, assisting with bunting. Footsteps approached, Captain Lytton's unmistakable scrape. He stopped short. "Dash it all, Mrs. Fletcher, I'd no notion anyone else was skulking about." Jessica rose, watch in hand. The captain's features rearranged swiftly into bland surprise. "Mislaid something, have we?" he asked. Without waiting for reply, he saluted with his cane and strode on, favouring the leg that had once earned him a medal. Jessica slipped the watch into her pocket, senses tingling with the electric potential peculiar to unsolved puzzles. Evening draped the village in lavender. The Fate's preview reception filled the parish hall with the aroma of elderflower cordial and anxious ambition. Jessica, armed with a clipboard, sampled entries in the short story competition, pastoral tragedies, gothic romances, even a science fiction parody set aboard HMS Pudding. Clara Dawlish's typescript, however, proved notably absent. When Jessica inquired, Mrs. Dawlish sighed. The poor lamb submitted nothing. Nerves, I dare say. Across the hall, Clara hovered near the door, cheeks blotched, speaking to no one. Cecil Prothero, meanwhile, circulated with forced joviality, laughing a beat too late at every remark. The pocket watch, cool against Jessica's palm, seemed suddenly heavy with implication. As twilight gathered, a summer storm threatened, the air thick with the scent of ozone. Reverend Pargeter proposed a final toast. Lightning flickered beyond the mullioned windows. Jessica scribbled impressions: storm, money, watch, 3:17. She recalled that trains to London passed St Mary Mead at precisely that minute. Could the frozen hands hint at a rendezvous on the line? Conjecture, she reminded herself. Clues first, theories later. The reception dispersed beneath rumbling skies. Jessica lingered to exchange pleasantries with Millicent Kane, who pressed a paper cone of lavender into her hand. "For restful sleep," the pharmacist murmured, though her eyes darted towards the darkened churchyard, as if expecting spectres. Thunder rolled while Jessica climbed the stairs of the Dovecote. Mrs. Dawlish met her on the landing, face pinched. "Have you seen Clara, Mrs. Fletcher? She slipped out after 9 and hasn't returned. I shouldn't worry, but with this storm..." Jessica offered calm assurances and promised to keep watch from her window. Rain drummed steadily against the glass as midnight approached. Lamps glowed faintly along Ivy Lane, casting wavering pools upon the slick cobbles. Jessica sat at the writing desk, pen poised, when a figure emerged from the gloom below, hatless, cloak flapping, stumbling as though pursued. The lightning painted the lane in white-blue relief, and for one heartbeat Jessica saw the person's face, eyes wide, lips parted in terror. It was Clara Dawlish. Seconds later, another flash revealed the lane empty once more, save for the restless branches clawing at the sky. A scream never came, yet Jessica felt certain something dreadful had happened, something no amount of lavender could soothe. Slipping the watch into her dressing-gown pocket, she descended the creaking stairs, the smell of wet roses drifting through an open door. The night, it seemed, had chosen to prove Mrs. Dawlish wrong. St Mary Mead would not be quiet as a mouse after all. Chapter 2. A Cry in the Lane. Jessica Fletcher seldom feared darkness, yet the night that followed the fête rehearsal in St Mary Mead tested even her seasoned composure. At 11:30, the storm still bullied the valley, rattling windows of the dovecote and spattering rain like thrown gravel across the panes. Jessica sat at the small escritoire in her room, ink pen hovering above unlined foolscap, organizing thoughts about pocket watches that stopped at 3:17 and ledgers that refused to stay hidden. She was about to retire when a movement below tugged her attention. The shape of a young woman, hatless and breathless, flitted beneath the gas lamp on Ivy Lane. Lightning flared, pinning the figure in silver relief. Clara Dawlish, Jessica was sure of it, glanced back over her shoulder in abject terror, then melted once more into darkness. Instinct wrested control from caution. Jessica seized her raincoat, thrust her feet into stout shoes, and hurried downstairs. The hallway lamp burned low, but Mrs. Dawlish's parlour door remained closed. Better not alarm her yet. Outside, the air had the metallic tang that follows summer thunder. Jessica's torch carved a white tunnel through the rain as she turned up her collar and stepped into the lane. Wind pressed cold water through the seams of her coat, while branches, heavy with wet leaves, lashed overhead like unsettled sprites. She called Clara's name twice, once firm, once softer, but the storm stole both pleas and tossed them skyward. A glimmer caught Jessica's gaze, small, dull gold amidst the puddles, a single Mary Jane shoe, sodden and strapless, lying askew in the gutter. She stooped to retrieve it, rain sliding from her hat brim. A child's voice might have whimpered at such a discovery. Jessica instead noted the scuff on the toe, fresh, the buckle bent, as though wrenched free in haste. She straightened, scanning the hedgerow bordering Ivy Lane, and pressed onward toward the churchyard, whose yews loomed black against erratic violet flashes. Halfway to the lich gate, she nearly collided with Edmund Merryweather, dashing from the opposite direction, umbrella long since surrendered to the wind. Drops clung to his sparse eyebrows. His breath came in ragged bursts. "Mrs. Fletcher, thank the heavens, you've seen her." "No, but I'm following her trail," Jessica replied, raising the shoe. "From where did you come?" "I was closing the marquee flaps when I noticed a girl sprinting toward the church. Thought it odd. No coat in this weather, so I gave chase." A new clap of thunder obliged them to move. They reached the churchyard, its wrought-iron gate protesting with a shrill squeal. Lanterns along the gravel path had blown out, leaving the graves to hunker in awful silhouette. Jessica's torch wavered over name-worn stones. Rain slithered off angels' wings. Edmund circled left toward the vestry door, while Jessica followed the central path to the bell tower, each footstep muffled by wet moss. She found Clara beside the gate to the ancient smithy, crumpled like damp parchment. Mud streaked her nightdress beneath an unbuttoned cardigan, auburn hair plastered to her cheeks. One arm lay outstretched, hand half clenched, as though reaching for sanctuary. Jessica knelt, fingers at the girl's neck, pulse faint but present. Relief loosened the knot in her chest. A louder crack of lightning revealed what Clara had etched on the stonework. The letters CP hurried as if each stroke cost a second of strength. Jessica's eyes narrowed. Cecil Prothero, or something else beginning with those initials. She memorized the angle of the carving before Edmund's returning footsteps splashed behind her. "Merciful Lord," he breathed, sinking to his knees opposite. He shrugged off his tweed jacket and tucked it around Clara. "She's alive?" "Barely. We must fetch Dr. Gray at once," Jessica said. "There's no time to move her far." Edmund volunteered to run. His figure vanished among leaning tombs. Jessica remained, sheltering Clara with her own body against the rain's relentless curtain. The village church clock tolled midnight, sonorous and mournful, each strike reverberating through the sodden air like an omen. Minutes later, Dr. Elspeth Gray arrived, brisk despite the elements, her black bag clattering with glass and metal. She examined Clara, a cut above the brow, superficial, abrasions on knees and palms, pulse thready. Shock and hypothermia, the doctor pronounced, uncapping a vial and pressing morphia into Clara's arm. We'll carry her to the vicarage. Pargeter keeps a spare room warm for travellers. With Edmund's help, they formed a makeshift stretcher from an old vestry door. Jessica led, torch guiding uneven steps past weathered gravestones. Reverend Lawrence Pargeter awaited them, cassock hastily thrown over pyjamas, face pinched with anxiety. Under his roof, Clara was put to bed, blankets piled high, hot bricks at her feet. An oil stove hissed reassuring warmth into the little chamber. "Will she speak when consciousness returns?" Jessica asked softly. "Perhaps by morning," Dr. Gray replied. "The sedative will soothe her nerves, but it's rest she needs most. Keep watch for fever." While the doctor wrote instructions, Jessica examined Clara's hand. Dirt lodged beneath short nails. In her palm lay a scrap of parchment, almost lost. She teased it free, startling Reverend Pargeter, who hovered like a guardian angel. "May I?" he asked. "Later," Jessica answered, slipping the fragment into her notebook. "Evidence first, explanations later. One must respect the order of things." Back downstairs in the vicarage parlour, tea steamed in battered Worcester cups, and thunder receded into a distant grumble. Mrs. Dawlish arrived, shawl clenched tight, eyes shining with gratitude and fear. Jessica reassured her daughter would recover, omitting mention of the initials for now. Conversation drifted to the fête finances. Reverend Pargeter confessed that Clara had approached him a week earlier with questions about missing donations. Before he could launch an inquiry, the ledger vanished. "She feared making enemies," he said ruefully. "Young hearts underestimate their own courage." Jessica thought of the initials again. If Clara meant Cecil Prothero, had she intended to expose him? Or might CP stand for something else entirely? Perhaps the captain, whose cane tapped out impatience each time they met. She recalled Captain Lytton's surprise when she appeared on the church path that morning, and the thinly veiled irritation in Cecil's face whenever Clara's name arose. Rain-muted dawn arrived at 5:30. Jessica left the vicarage, promising to return after breakfast. Ivy Lane lay washed clean, puddles reflecting bruised clouds. The shoe still dangled from her coat pocket. She placed it upon the stone wall outside the dovecote to dry in the weak sun. Inside, while Mrs. Dawlish brewed strong coffee, Jessica unfolded the parchment salvaged from Clara's clenched fist. Smudged ink revealed only a few decipherable lines. Found it in the old book. Proof that Ivy Meadow was never his. Must tell Aunt before Saturday. If C. The fragment ended in a tear, yet the pieces aligned. Ivy Meadow, the ledger, inheritance talk, Cecil's anxiety. Slowly, as coffee scented the room, a mosaic formed in Jessica's mind. Half-coloured tiles still missing, but pattern emerging nonetheless. She spent the morning under a borrowed umbrella, tracing Clara's likely route. From the dovecote to Ivy Lane, through the churchyard, ending by the smithy gate. Footprints were scarce, washed away, but broken twigs in the beech hedge suggested a pursuer's clumsy passage. Near the smithy door, she discovered a fresh gouge on the wooden frame, as though struck by a hard metal object, perhaps Captain Lytton's silver-tipped cane. She photographed it with her pocket camera, another habit of seasoned sleuths. Returning to the dovecote for luncheon, Jessica found Cecil Prothero waiting in the parlour, hat twisting nervously between his fingers. "I came to inquire about Miss Clara," he said, voice studiously calm. "Such dreadful business. Will she remember what happened?" The question, phrased so precisely, confirmed more suspicion than any denial. Jessica offered a polite yet non-committal answer and watched the relief, or was it fear, flicker across his narrow face. When Mrs. Dawlish entered with a tray of sandwiches, Cecil sprang up, overrunning her with apologies and promises of financial assistance. His performance might have deceived the untrained eye. Jessica's was anything but. After he left, she asked Mrs. Dawlish a gentle question. Had Cecil handled the family's legal affairs long? Since her father's passing, came the reply, he had been executor and accountant both. Such trust, Jessica reflected, can be fertile ground for hidden weeds. By twilight, Clara still slept, though her pulse was strong. The doctor was optimistic. Jessica sat alone beneath the boughs of Ivy Meadow, journal balanced on her lap, and catalogued facts. A ledger hidden and stolen, donations missing, Ivy Meadow's unclear ownership, a young woman threatened into silence. And cross-referenced the slim golden watch from yesterday, its hands fixed at 3:17. An exact moment when London trains thundered through St Mary Mead, signalling arrivals or departures unseen. When at last crimson sunset yielded to indigo night, Jessica closed her journal with a decisive snap. The game, as her late friend Sherlock Holmes might have said, was afoot. And in St Mary Mead, the quietest lanes were beginning to reverberate with secrets longing to be heard. Chapter 3. The Ledger in the Belfry. The Sunday bells of St Mary Mead pealed through the quiet air like a gentle summons to truth. Jessica Fletcher stood in the shade of the churchyard yew tree, her gaze on the belfry above. Last night's events still lingered in her mind like the final chord of a requiem. Clara's collapse, the carved initials, the frightened faces of those who knew too much and said too little. Clara remained under Dr. Gray's care, sleeping restlessly. Jessica, however, couldn't sleep. She'd risen early, slipped out without waking Mrs. Dawlish, and made her way to the heart of the mystery. The Church of St Leonard had stood for nearly 600 years. Its stones bore the weight of secrets older than empire. And yet, Jessica's instincts told her the key to this particular mystery wasn't buried in history, but hidden in plain sight. She waited until the last of the early parishioners drifted away from morning service, then approached Reverend Pargeter just outside the vestry door. His thin frame was half swallowed by his robes, and he looked every inch the gentle scholar priest, save for the flicker of anxiety behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Ah, Mrs. Fletcher," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Come for the later service?" "Not today, I'm afraid. I wondered if I might trouble you for a look inside the belfry." He blinked. "The belfry? I believe Clara may have hidden something there. She mentioned it before she lost consciousness." The vicar hesitated, then nodded. "Very well. But please, do take care. The upper floor hasn't been used since the bell ropes were moved to the lower chamber." Jessica followed him through the narrow arch and up the steep wooden stairs. The air grew cooler as they climbed, the scent of old stone and dust mixing with candle wax and damp hymnals. At the top, Reverend Pargeter handed her a ring of iron keys. "The chest is in the far corner behind the choir robes. I'll wait below." Alone now, Jessica moved carefully across the creaking boards, her torch flicking over cobwebs and bird feathers. She found the chest, large, oak, bound in blackened iron. One key fit the lock. Inside were old service programs, faded sheet music, and beneath them, a grey cloth-bound ledger, edges curled with age. She lifted it with reverence. It had the musty scent of secrets. The cover bore no title, but embossed on the inside, C.P., Cecil Prothero. She turned the first page. Deeds, land records, ancestral tax receipts. Jessica recognized names: Lytton, Dawlish, Kane, interwoven through entries stretching back to the late 19th century. One entry in particular had been bookmarked with a yellowed paperclip. Ivy Meadow, deed suspended, 1948. Transfer of ownership deferred, beneficiary trust pending legal clarification. Executor C. Prothero. Jessica's brow furrowed. Deferred? Not voided. The rightful beneficiary, almost certainly Ottilie Dawlish, had never been notified. Another note caught her eye, in fresh blue ink. Clara's handwriting: "This is it. This proves they lied. We'll take photos before someone finds it." She closed the ledger gently and tucked it under her arm. A floorboard groaned behind her. She turned sharply, torch raised, but saw only shadows and dust. Yet she was certain someone had followed her. They'd lingered just beyond the doorway, listening. She descended quickly and, to her surprise, found not Reverend Pargeter, but Edmund Merriweather at the base of the stairs, wringing his hat in both hands. "Forgive me," he stammered. I was walking past and heard voices." "No need to apologize," Jessica said smoothly. "Have you been in the Belfry recently?" He flushed. "Number, not in years." "Interesting," Jessica said, not unkindly. "Because the floorboards up there are worn in places only fresh steps would reach." He opened his mouth, closed it again. Jessica smiled gently. "You might want to speak with Clara when she wakes." Back at the Dovecote, Jessica laid out the ledger on the writing desk in her room and carefully examined its later pages. In them were increasingly obscure entries, consolidations, miscellaneous holdings, and transfers to limited companies with vaguely familiar names. She scribbled on her pad, "Lytton and Company. Founded 1957, Dawlish Trust, Estuary. 1948, Ivy Meadow, unreleased title." It all pointed to one conclusion: Ivy Meadow had been stripped from Ottilie through a deliberate paper trail engineered by Prothero and possibly Captain Lytton. A knock at her door pulled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Dawlish entered, pale. "Cecil was here," she said, "asking questions about you. Said you were stirring trouble." "I'm stirring the truth," Jessica said. She gestured to the ledger. "Ottilie, your father tried to ensure you inherited the meadow, but Cecil suppressed the paperwork and diverted the land into a shell holding." Ottilie sat down, stunned. "But why?" "For profit," Jessica said softly. "And for power. Ivy Meadow was valuable, not only for its soil, but its position." Ottilie was silent a moment, then whispered, "Clara knew. She's the only one who ever asked questions. I thought she was chasing fairy tales, but she was protecting our name." "She was protecting your legacy," Jessica said, "and someone wanted her silenced." Prakrov. That afternoon, Jessica paid a quiet visit to Captain Lytton's home. He greeted her in a silk waistcoat, brandy already in hand. "Mrs. Fletcher, come to judge my sponges again?" She held up the ledger. "Actually, I thought you might help me understand a few old documents." Lytton's face twitched, but he recovered quickly. "Always happy to assist a lady." "Excellent," she said. "Then perhaps you can explain how your name appears on the Articles of Consolidation for the Dawlish Trust, dated 1958, with Cecil Prothero as witness." The captain took the ledger, glanced at it, and returned it swiftly. "Old business," he said, "best left buried." Jessica nodded. "I expect Clara felt differently." He fixed her with a glinting eye. "Is that a threat, madam?" "A fact," she replied. That night, Jessica sat beside Clara's bed. The girl stirred, eyelids fluttering. "Clara," she said softly. "The ledger, I found it." Clara's eyes opened slowly. No? Jessica nodded. And they're worried. Clara took a long breath. Good. Jessica smiled gently. Rest now, the truth is out. We'll see justice served. Clara's eyes closed again, the relief written in the softening lines of her face. Outside, the bells of St Mary Mead rang once more, but this time their tone was not one of simple ritual, it was a summons, a clarion call for the sins of the past to answer for themselves. Chapter 5, A Garden of Secrets. Jessica Fletcher had always believed that gardens spoke, some softly, others in confession. And the garden behind Ivy Meadow, the parcel of land at the edge of St Mary Mead, whose very ownership seemed steeped in controversy, was the most secretive yet. It murmured in rustling leaves, creaked in old gates, and whispered truths hidden beneath beds of forget-me-nots and rotting paving stones. The morning after the fête auction and her thinly veiled announcement of fraud, Jessica set off just past 6 with the packet of Clara's photographic negatives in her coat pocket. A light mist still clung to hedgerows as she passed the old parish boundary where Ivy Meadow began. Despite its lush summer growth, the field had a wildness to it, rose bushes run rampant, an old stone bench cracked and swallowed by vines, and in the distance, a weathered trellis straining under ivy that had long since forgotten its purpose. But it was the locked iron gate behind the dovecote storage shed that interested her most. Jessica had noticed it days ago, half concealed behind flowering dogwood and a rusted wheelbarrow. This morning she came prepared, with a small crowbar borrowed discreetly from Reverend Pargeter's tool cupboard. The lock gave way with a reluctant snap. She stepped through into a hidden portion of the garden, overgrown, tangled, yet strangely deliberate in its design. A child's rusted tricycle lay overturned under a broken plum tree. Moss-covered stones outlined the faint trace of a footpath. The earth here was softer, unsettled in places, as if something had recently been unearthed, or hastily buried. Near the old sundial, a patch of paving stone sat looser than the others. Jessica knelt, fingers brushing aside fallen petals, and discovered one stone that lifted with effort. Beneath it lay a dented tin box wrapped in wax paper. Inside, yellowing receipts, legal notations, and a folded letter. Her breath caught as she read, "My darling Clara, if you're reading this, it means I was right to fear what would happen should the truth come out. Ivy Meadow belongs to your Aunt Ottilie. My father's will named her the rightful heir, but the deed was altered, stolen. I believe Mr. Prothero and someone else did it long ago under the guise of managing affairs. I've hidden the original ledger in the old church belfry. Use it wisely. Do not trust Mr. P." "Mr. P," Jessica murmured, standing slowly. Prothero seemed the obvious candidate, but Clara had written the initial. Could it mean Reverend Pargeter? Or Captain Lytton, whose name, while not beginning with P, often signed documents as H.P. Lytton? Or Edmund Merriweather, whose middle name she now remembered, Percival? Jessica closed the tin. One thing was clear, Clara's grandfather knew more than he had shared before his passing, and he had tried to warn his granddaughter. A branch snapped behind her. She turned swiftly, hand tightening on the crowbar, but the path was empty. Just beyond the fence, however, the ivy moved unnaturally, as if someone had stepped away only moments before. Jessica returned to the dovecote where Mrs. Dawlish stood at the kitchen sink, rubbing a single teacup over and over. "I know you've been trying to protect Clara," Jessica began gently. "But the land behind this house, it was promised to you, wasn't it?" Ottilie's hand trembled. "My father told me it was mine, but Cecil handled the documents. He said they were lost, or never signed properly. I was young, And he made it sound so final. It wasn't, Jessica said, holding out the letter. Your father tried to shield the truth. Ottilie read it in silence, one hand pressed to her lips. I always thought it odd how Cecil insisted I sign over access to the garden's western edge. Said it was to appease a boundary dispute with the Littons. But I never saw the other party's signature. Because there wasn't one, Jessica said. The land was quietly appropriated. Dear God, Ottilie whispered. How much have I lost? Not everything, Jessica said. The paper trail exists, and Clara's bravery may have preserved it. But later that morning, Jessica visited the solicitor's office in nearby Brackley-on-Holt. Mr. Arkwright, a cautious man with spectacles chained to his lapel, examined the letter and negatives with care. These certainly raise eyebrows, he murmured, especially the note about the trust freeze. That clause was buried. I'll initiate a search for the original deed. If we can prove mismanagement, Mrs. Dawlish may reclaim ownership and press charges. As Jessica departed, she felt eyes on her. A navy Jaguar idled across the square, Captain Lytton behind the wheel, cigarette smouldering. Their eyes met. He nodded, expression unreadable, then drove off, slowly. Back in St Mary Mead, Jessica paid a visit to Millicent Kane. I believe you've seen the ledger in question, she said, without preamble. Millicent didn't feign innocence. Only once when Clara showed me photographs. She was frightened, rightly so. I told her to submit it to the parish trustees, but she said they couldn't be trusted. And were you ever consulted about the land deed? Hardly, Millicent said, her smile thin. Cecil always made sure Ottilie's legal matters remained his private domain. Jessica paused. Clara mentioned not trusting Mr. P. Any idea who else might be included in that warning? Millicent's face darkened. There's something you should know. Edmund Merriweather came to me once, years ago, with a copy of that same boundary agreement, only the signature was misspelled. Ottilie Dawlish with 2 L's. Forged, obviously. I reported it to Cecil. He assured me it was a clerical mistake. A forged signature. That confirmed it. Paragraph. That evening, Jessica sat with Reverend Pargeter. The church was quiet, its stained glass windows casting ruby and sapphire light upon the flagstones. Clara's grandfather placed the ledger in your care once, I believe, she said gently. Pargeter looked stunned, then sighed. He did? Asked me to store it in the Belfry chest with the old hymnals. Said he feared those men would burn it. And did they? Someone removed it. I assumed it was him until Clara mentioned it last month. He folded his hands. I never opened it. Perhaps I should have. No need to blame yourself, Jessica said. Clara retrieved it. She risked everything. Pargeter looked haunted. And for what? Land. For justice, Jessica said firmly. For the truth. As the sun dipped beyond Ivy Lane, Jessica returned to the place where Clara had been found, by the smithy gate. There, half buried in the soil, she noticed something she'd missed before, a brass cufflink shaped like a stag's head, its antlers broken. She examined it closely. On the back was engraved HPL, Captain Horace, P. Lytton. The initials made her heart pound. Mr. P. Not Prothero, not Pargeter. Lytton. The bluff captain, forever blustering, had lied about the land, about the ledger, about his involvement. And if he had pursued Clara that night, then perhaps it wasn't just a matter of property. Perhaps it had been an attempt to silence her. Permanently. Tomorrow she thought she would press him. But tonight she hid the cufflink safely in her valise and let the secrets of the garden speak no more. Chapter 6. The Quietest Man. Jessica Fletcher had learned over the years that the loudest suspects were rarely the guiltiest. True menace often crept in on soft shoes, camouflaged by manners, humility, or a reputation for helpfulness. And in St Mary Mead, no one moved more quietly, more invisibly, than Edmund Merryweather. He had always seemed agreeable enough, always present, always peripheral, which Jessica now realized was exactly the problem. That morning, she walked briskly through the high street, ledger tucked safely in her shoulder bag, heading toward the village library where Edmund volunteered on Tuesdays. The bells from St Leonard's still rang faintly in her ears as she entered the Tudor-fronted building, its scent of polished wood and sun-warmed paper wrapping around her like a familiar shawl. Edmund sat at the reference desk, cataloguing a stack of periodicals. He looked up and smiled too quickly. "Ah, Mrs. Fletcher, such a pleasure." "Good morning, Mr. Merryweather. I hoped to borrow a moment of your time." "Of course, the reference room is empty." He led her inside. The thick wooden door swung shut behind them. Jessica set her bag gently on the table and folded her hands. "I retrieved the ledger," she said, "and Clara's negatives." Edmund's eyes flickered. "Then you've seen the deed?" "I have, and the trust records, and the forged clause with Ottilie Dawlish's name misspelled." Edmund sat down slowly. "That wasn't me." "No?" Jessica raised an eyebrow. "Yet Millicent Kane remembers you bringing her a copy of the deed years ago, one with a false signature. She says you were alarmed, asked her if it looked authentic." He flushed, then looked down. Yes, I didn't forge it, but I found it. Or rather, I was told to file it." "Told by Cecil?" "Yes." Edmund sighed. "I was a junior clerk back then, just out of school. My family had fallen on hard times, and Cecil offered me work helping with the church accounts. I wanted to believe he was doing something noble." Jessica tilted her head. "You didn't just want to believe. You convinced yourself, and when Clara began asking questions, she was too clever for her own good," he muttered. "Kept chasing things, poking into filing cabinets, pestering the vicar. I warned her." His voice caught. "I didn't want her harmed. I never meant—" Jessica stiffened. "You never meant what, Mr. Merryweather?" He closed his eyes. "That night, I saw her run from the fête, heading toward the Belfry path. I thought she'd found something. Proof. I followed just to talk to her, but she panicked, slipped near the smithy, hit her head on the post." "You left her there," Jessica said flatly. "I was afraid. It wasn't intentional. I thought she might wake up." "And you didn't fetch help?" I didn't think she was that badly hurt. I saw lights coming. I panicked." Jessica stood. "You tried to cover it up, didn't you? You returned later and removed the stone she scratched, but not before I saw the initials." He looked up in alarm. You didn't tell the police?" "Not yet," Jessica said, "but I will." Jessica left the library with a grim certainty tightening around her like a belt. Edmund's confession hadn't surprised her, only its quietness. His guilt wasn't the roaring villainy of pulp fiction, but the soft, shameful kind that festered in dim corners. By noon, she was seated once again in the vicarage parlour with Reverend Pargeter, the ledger open between them. "Mr. Merryweather followed Clara the night of the storm," she said plainly. He admitted it. Pargeter removed his glasses and cleaned them on a handkerchief. Dear God, Edmund was always meek. "Meek men sometimes carry heavy burdens," Jessica replied. "But I think he was manipulated early, fed just enough secrecy to bind him to the Prothero-Lytton axis." The vicar's brow furrowed. "And Captain Lytton?" "I found his cufflink near where Clara was attacked. A stag's head, same crest on the ledger paper." Pargeter grimaced. "I confronted Cecil once about the land trust, years ago. He insisted everything had been documented properly. didn't press. I suppose I didn't want to believe there was rot within the parish. You weren't the only one, Jessica said kindly. Later, Jessica visited Dr. Gray's surgery. Clara was awake, pale but composed. I remember his voice, she said softly. Mr. Merriweather. He was behind me when I ran. He tried to stop me. Did he push you? But he grabbed my arm. I jerked away and slipped. Jessica nodded. It matches his account. He'll be questioned. But more importantly, the evidence you uncovered will restore your family's land. Clara reached under her pillow and handed Jessica a scrap of notepaper. He didn't get everything, she whispered. I wrote down the real clause, just in case. Jessica read the line. Transfer to C. Prothero, suspended pending witness verification. Beneficiary, Ottilie Dawlish. Cecil knew, Jessica murmured. Yes, Clara said, and Lytton paid him to bury it. After that evening, Jessica returned to the Dovecote. As she passed through the garden, she noticed something strange. Captain Lytton's walking cane leaning against the stone wall, unattended. Inside, Ottilie Dawlish waited near the hearth. Captain Lytton came by an hour ago, she said, eyes tight. Said he wanted to speak with you. Jessica frowned. Did he leave a message? Only this. She handed Jessica a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sentence, written in dark ink. The past may be buried, Mrs. Fletcher, but roots grow deep. I do not take kindly to threats. Jessica folded the paper. Lytton had been quiet. Too quiet. But now the net was tightening. Tomorrow she would speak with the inspector. Tonight she made copies of everything. The ledger pages, Clara's letter, the deed clause, and the cufflink. And then she placed them in a padded envelope addressed to her lawyer. She would not be outmaneuvered. Outside, the air grew still. But in St Mary Mead, the quiet before the storm had passed. Now came the reckoning. Chapter 7. A trap in the fog. By the following morning, Jessica Fletcher had laid the pieces on the board. All that remained now was to see which player moved first. Clara was safe, the evidence was secure, and the village's once placid heart had begun to pulse with unease. It was time to bait a trap and let guilt walk itself straight into it. She invited key players to an informal gathering at the parish hall under the guise of fête reflection. The storm of 3 nights past had kept many from properly discussing the event's success, she explained. It was the perfect excuse. Jessica arrived early to arrange chairs and adjust lighting, subtle things that gave her full view of expressions under harsh ceiling lamps. She brewed tea, laid out modest biscuits, and waited. By 6 o'clock they trickled in, Cecil Prothero, eyes darting nervously over every shoulder, Captain Lytton cool and polished, cane tapping rhythmically, Reverend Pargeter visibly uneasy but steady, Millicent Kane jaw tight, watchful, Edmund Merriweather last to arrive, hands trembling as he buttoned his coat halfway and then forgot to finish. Jessica smiled warmly at all of them, a hostess masking her scrutiny. Thank you for coming, she said. As we consider this year's fête, it seemed fitting to reflect on the event's deeper meaning, community, trust, tradition, and what happens when those values are misused. Lytton sniffed. Rather a grand tone, Mrs. Fletcher. Shall we move to business? Shortly, Jessica said, but first a story. They shifted in their seats. A long time ago, she began, a parcel of land called Ivy Meadow was held in trust. Its rightful heir was never informed of her inheritance. Instead, the property was quietly diverted through manipulated legal documents and hidden accounts. Mrs. Fletcher, Prothero interrupted. If this is... I'm speaking, she said, voice sharper now. Recently, a young woman named Clara Dawlish discovered this truth, She found a ledger, documented it, and attempted to expose the wrongdoing. Someone tried to stop her. Gasps broke out. Reverend Pargeter paled. Millicent leaned forward. Lytton's cane thudded once on the floor. Jessica opened her notebook. I have a full copy of the ledger, Clara's negatives, the deed clause that names Ottilie Dawlish, and this— She held up the brass cufflink. Found near the smithy where Clara fell. She turned it. HPL engraved on the back. Captain Lytton stood abruptly. Anyone could have dropped that. True, Jessica said. But only one person threatened Clara by name. On the path, the night of the storm. And only one person used his cane to strike a doorframe, where I later found a matching gouge. Lytton sneered. Do you imagine me some villain from one of your novels? Jessica walked slowly toward him. You were afraid Clara would cost you everything. You'd paid Prothero to bury the truth decades ago. You had Edmund manage the details, but Clara was cleverer than you thought. Lytton turned to go, but the door opened, and Inspector Crenshaw stepped in, flanked by 2 constables. I'm afraid you'll have to stay, Crenshaw said coolly. Jessica nodded. We staged this meeting so you'd make your move, and you did. Edmund crumpled into a chair. I didn't know he'd chase her. I thought we were only preserving the peace. You preserved a lie? Millicent snapped. Prothero rose, voice high. I only followed instructions. Lytton forged the original clause. Lytton whirled on him. You were paid for your silence, you greedy. Enough, Crenshaw barked. We'll sort it at the station. Paragraph an hour later, Jessica sat with Crenshaw and Pargeter in the church office. So Lytton altered the trust documents? Yes, Crenshaw said. Years ago, we found records in his study. He kept duplicates. Enough to reopen the case. Clara's documents will help us finish it. And Edmund? He'll be charged with obstruction, possibly reckless endangerment, but given his cooperation and confession, it may be lenient. Pargeter looked devastated. To think such deceit lived among us. Jessica touched his hand. It always does, Reverend, but so does courage. Clara's, Ottilie's, even yours now. That night, Jessica returned to the Dovecote. Ottilie met her at the door, tears in her eyes. It's over, Jessica said softly. I had no idea how deep it ran, Ottilie whispered. Now you know, and you'll get your land back. But more than that, you'll reclaim your family's truth. Ottilie hugged her fiercely. You've given us that, Jessica. Jessica smiled. You gave it to yourselves. I only held up the mirror. As she prepared for bed, she looked out the window toward Ivy Lane. The fog had lifted. Tomorrow would dawn with honesty and peace. Chapter 8. Truth beneath Ivy Lane. The sun rose over St Mary Mead with a stillness that felt earned. For the first time in days there was no wind, no rain, no whispers riding the hedgerows. Only a soft hush as morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the Dovecote's parlour, where Jessica Fletcher sat at her usual window seat, a fresh cup of tea in hand and a thick file of notes resting on her lap. A knock at the front door stirred the silence. Ottilie Dawlish, less shaken and more upright than she'd seemed in weeks, answered it. Inspector Crenshaw stepped inside, his coat dusted with early dew. It's official, he said, nodding at Jessica. Captain Lytton has been formally charged with fraud, perjury, and conspiracy to conceal inheritance documents. Cecil Prothero is in custody. As for Edmund Merriweather, he'll testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's shaken, but cooperative. Jessica sipped her tea. I'm glad to hear it. The legal process may take months, Crenshaw added, but Mrs. Dawlish will be reinstated as rightful heir to Ivy Meadow. The ledger, the negatives, Clara's testimony, airtight. The old trust clause will stand. Ottilie's hand trembled as she lowered a teacup. I never dreamed I'd get it back, all these years. Jessica gave her a kind smile. Your father tried to protect you. Clara finished what he began. She saved us, Ottilie whispered, at such a cost. Crenshaw glanced toward the staircase. How is she this morning? Resting, Jessica replied. But calmer. She remembers everything. Good, said the inspector, standing. There's one more thing. That old ledger, will you be keeping it, Mrs. Fletcher? Jessica smiled faintly. Number, I've done my part. Let it return to the parish archives, where it belongs. He tipped his hat and departed into the warming morning. Paraff. By midday, Jessica and Clara strolled slowly along Ivy Lane, pausing at the rusted gate that led into the overgrown western garden. A locksmith had visited that morning. The gate now hung on new hinges. The Dawlish crest, once weathered by time, had been polished clean. I can't believe it's really ours, Clara murmured. It always was, Jessica said gently. It was only hidden. The garden was alive with renewed promise. Bees drifted lazily between rose blossoms. The old bench had been repaired, and in its place stood a small plaque Ottilie had quietly ordered that morning. In honour of Arthur Dawlish and all who protected the truth. Clara turned to Jessica, eyes shining. Why did you stay, really? I mean, St Mary Mead, the fête, this old feud, you could have gone home days ago. Jessica smiled. Because truth, Clara, has a peculiar way of calling out to those who listen. And I've learned never to ignore a whisper, especially when it comes from a garden path. Clara laughed lightly, and the sound lifted the lingering heaviness from the lane. Paraff. The following day, Jessica visited the vicarage one last time to hand Reverend Pargeter a copy of the restored deed. You should archive this, she said, in case anyone else gets ambitious. He chuckled softly. The sins of the fathers, eh? And the courage of the daughters, she replied. Let's not forget that. Before she left, the vicar hesitated. Mrs. Fletcher, if I may ask, what would you have done had you been wrong? I wasn't, she said, simply, then softened. But if I had been, there would have been fewer mended fences, and perhaps one more mystery for someone else to solve. Paraff back at the Dovecote, her bags were packed, her manuscripts stored, and her train ticket to London tucked safely into her coat pocket. Ottilie hugged her with genuine warmth. I owe you more than I can say. You owe Clara, Jessica said, and your own instincts. I nearly buried them. Not quite. That garden held its breath for you. And now it can exhale. Jessica stepped into the carriage as the noon train chugged gently out of Brackley Halt, the village shrinking behind her until even Ivy Lane was just a green stitch in the patchwork of fields. She opened her notebook and began a new chapter. The Secret of Ivy Lane. A story of silence and revelation, of forged names and real courage, of how the truth, however buried, grows toward the light. And with the rhythm of steel on rail and the smell of countryside rolling past her window, Jessica smiled. The truth had come home. And justice, as always, had worn the quietest shoes